Hi, everybody.
Obviously, we're not in Richmond.
No, we're...
It's dry up here.
It's dry and sunny, and from what I understand right now, that is
not what Richmond is having right now.
Yeah. So hopefully everybody back in RVA is staying
safe
and dry. Because, yeah. Anyways, hope that you have had a wonderful 4th of July weekend. Heat and storms aside.
And train disaster
aside.
Train
derailments and...
because RVA just can't have a normal 4th of July.
Okay, we hope you survived the 4th of July.
Yeah.
Yes. And that includes all fingers intact.
And there's Reese's as a reward.
That is not a sponsorship.
No, it's not.
It'd be nice, but it's not.
That's me going, I'm going to need some chocolate to get through tonight.
Why?
Caffeine.
We're on vacation. We are on vacation.
We are on vacation.
And we're here and very happy to be spending time with you. Well, we are on vacation.
Yes.
Because, well, we love spending time with you and all of that. And love telling spooky stories and all of that good stuff. So.
Yeah, and tonight's idea actually came courtesy from you guys. Alex, I believe, was the one who suggested we do a spooky revolutionary ghost. So I went down a rabbit hole.
Yes. So hopefully, Alex, you get a chance to catch this, even if not live, that you get a chance to catch this later. And in the meantime, Patrick. Hi, Patrick. Yes. Happy 4th of July season. And actually, well, now that it's already now July 6th.
It's spooky season.
It is spooky season now. We have declared it is post 4th of July. Therefore, it is now spooky season. So.
If you haven't decorated or you're not like us and decorate 24/7. 365.
And now is a perfectly acceptable time for you to go ahead and
pull out the skeletons and the bats and everything else.
All of that good stuff. So, but yeah, glad to have you here. And let's go ahead and dive in. Sorry,
well, that's because I was hiding the chocolate while I was opening it in case it went.
Oh, well, that's fair.
But it's now right here so we can share.
Oh, this is... I don't have the current script. You have the current script.
Okay, so we have to share.
I don't know why that happened.
Hi, Dana.
Hi, Dana. Hopefully you enjoyed your 4th of July as well. But yeah, for some reason I have the unedited version of it. I'll have to get this get it up on my side. But if you want to go ahead.
So mine is correct.
Yeah, yours is correct.
Okay, I'm just making sure. Because, we can't start a show without technical difficulties.
Yeah, no, that's my bad. I let myself get busy.
Sidetracked with the next project, which we'll talk about at the end of this. But we're going to go to Revolutionary Ghouls in Spirits.
Yep.
So.
I give up.
Okay.
So, we're going to share this. So, when you think of the American Revolution, we often picture bright uniforms, smoke-filled battlefields, midnight riders, and the birth of a nation. But beneath those familiar images are some darker stories. This was a war that was fought in frozen camps, burning towns, cramped prison ships, makeshift hospitals, and lonely forts where men were ordered to hold until the last possible moment. And when suffering leaves a mark that deep, some say history does not always stay buried. In this episode, we're going to follow the ghosts of the Revolution from battered Pennsylvania ramparts to haunted New England inns to frozen New Jersey woods and bloodstained churches and waters where prison ships once held the dying. These are stories of sacrifice, betrayal, survival, and spirits that may still linger where America's fight for independence turned especially grim.
I will say I did try to go to some of the not as well-known ones.
Yes, so yeah, you'll probably have heard of a lot of these places, but hopefully we'll have a couple of stories in here that might say, ooh, that's a new one by me.
Yes. So we're going to go to Fort Mifflin and just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So it's just south of Philadelphia, where the Delaware River bends past the airport and the modern world hums overhead. Fort Mifflin still sits on Mud Island. It's not the largest fort in America, nor is it the prettiest. Fort Mifflin sits low, damp, stubborn, surrounded by marshy ground, river, wind, and the uneasy sense that some places don't survive history as much as refuse to stop reliving it. In the fall of 1777, Philadelphia was in British hands. General William Howe had marched triumphantly into the city in late September, but victory came with a problem. His army needed supplies, powder, food, clothing, ammunition, everything required to turn a military occupation into something lasting. Those supplies waited aboard British ships in the Delaware Bay, but getting them upriver to Philadelphia was not as simple as just raising the sails and enjoying the scenery. No. The Americans controlled the river below the city, and Mud Island stood fortified, and it was originally, of course, built by the British, but it was seized by the American forces in 1775. Across the water in New Jersey stood Fort Mercer. Together, these two defenses blocked the Delaware and kept Howe's much-needed supplies from reaching Philadelphia. By autumn of 1777, roughly 200 American soldiers were garrisoned at what was now called Fort Mifflin. Their orders, simple and grim: hold the fort until the last possible moment. Sir, do you want to say hi?
Mr. Nico has some nails.
Come in.
I'll get him.
Coming up? He's right behind you.
Oh.
He's not happy that we don't have the normal setup. There he is, in a very ungraceful way.
There. Say hi, Mr. Nico.
Can you be seen? Not
I think
really.
he can be seen.
Barely. I can see your head right there.
Yeah, he's here.
All right. So, it's one of these phrases that sounds noble until you pause to consider what that really means. It means no easy surrender, no comfortable escape. It means holding until the walls come down or until the ammunition runs out and the wounded outnumber the living. Not a pretty picture. As the siege dragged on, the garrison swelled to about 400 men. They were cold, they were hungry, many were sick, and they were trying to hold an exposed fort on a frozen, marshy ground against the most powerful navy in the world. Somehow, for weeks, they did just that. For nearly 6 weeks, the Americans at Fort Mifflin and Fort Mercer frustrated the British attempts to open the Delaware River. Every day they delayed Howe was another day that Washington's exhausted army could move toward winter quarters. Another day before the British could gather the strength to pursue and destroy them. Another day closer to Valley Forge, where the Continental Army would suffer terribly but survive. Then came November 10th, 1777. At daybreak, the British began a bombardment that would become the largest in the American Revolution. Cannon fire rained down on Fort Mifflin, walls splintered, earthworks collapsed, barracks shook, and men were thrown into chaos, smoke, and screaming. Under the direction of French engineer Major Francois de Fleury, the Americans worked through the nights to repair what the British destroyed during the day. It was a cruel rhythm. At sunrise, the fort was smashed. After dark, the exhausted men patched it back together just enough to get smashed again. For days, rain and high tides added to their own misery. Then on November 15th, the weather cleared and the British brought the full weight of their assault. The ships of Elegant and Fury moved up to the back channel west of the fort, bringing 19 cannon into position. In the main channel, 3 British ships armed with 158 cannon anchored directly offshore. To the east, 3 more ships added another 51 cannon to the attack. Fort Mifflin could answer with 10. During 1 hour of bombardment, it was reported that 1,000 cannonballs were fired at the fort. British Marines climbed into the crow's nest in the Vigilant and hurled hand grenades down to the earthworks below. It's hard to imagine that it must have sounded like, let's just say it wasn't a fife and drum parade. This was a concussion of splintered timber mixed with burning powder, mud, blood, men pressed into the ground by sheer violence of noise. By the end, the defenders were exhausted, cold, and nearly out of ammunition. After nightfall, November 15th, Major Simon Thayer evacuated the surviving garrison across the river to Fort Mercer. The men rode with muffled oars, slipping away in the darkness, while the ruined fort still smoldered behind them. 40 men remained long enough to set fire to what was left, and then crossed to New Jersey around midnight. Fort Mifflin burned, but the flag was still flying. The British took the fort the next day, but they had paid dearly in time. The defenders had done what they had been ordered to do. They had held to the last extremity. Washington's army reached Valley Forge, and Fort Mifflin entered history as one of the places where defeat somehow became a type of victory. But the fort's story did not end with the Revolution. It was rebuilt about 20 years later. It served as a garrison during the War of 1812. During the Civil War, it became a prison, and in the 20th century, it was drawn back into military use during both World Wars, serving as part of the Navy ammunition operations and later housing anti-aircraft defenses. It was not decommissioned until 1954, ending 183 years of service.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah. That's a very long time for one patch of ground to absorb trauma that comes with wartime service. Today, the fort hosts tours, reenactments, educational programs, and paranormal investigations. It's also known as one of the most haunted historic sites in the region. Given the damp casements, the shadow barracks, the old powder rooms, and a few centuries of grief, all set on the bank of a cold river, it's difficult to imagine a location more ripe for reports on the paranormal. One of the most famous stories involves a visitor who toured the casements, the dark fortified chambers built after the Revolution to protect future soldiers from bombardment. They were damp, bug-filled, miserable, and were eventually considered unsuitable for habitation. Naturally, during the Civil War, people were held there anyway, because they could. After the tour, the visitor complimented the executive director on her guide. He had been excellent, she said. Young, knowledgeable, dressed in a Civil War uniform. Only one problem. It had been a Revolutionary War event. The staff were dressed accordingly. No one in Civil War uniform was assigned to the casements. When the director went to check, the rooms were empty. This was not an isolated incident. Visitors have praised reenactors who were not on the schedule, including Civil War soldier who seems to appear in the casement or powder room offering tours with an impressive authenticity before vanishing from the record like a man who never signed in, because technically he probably died before the clipboard was even invented. Just saying. Staff and reenactors have their own stories. One former guide slept in the officers' quarters and was awakened every morning at exactly 3 a.m. by a knock at the door. No one was ever there. He later learned that 3 a.m. was when the next watch would have been called. The reenactor once spent a night in the casements with a fire burning and the door locked from the inside. He woke to see a Revolutionary War soldier warming himself by the flames. When he looked again, the soldier was gone. Others have reported a shadow figure rattling doorknobs, faces appearing in empty rooms, and voices close enough to brush the ear. Pardon.
One reenactor cleaning up at the end of the night heard a pleasant woman's voice say, "Thank you." It was apparently polite. It was also apparently enough to send him sleeping somewhere else. Then there are the regulars. Near the blacksmith shop, staff and visitors have heard the rhythmic strike of hammer on anvil, only for the sound to stop when someone approaches the empty room. Doors open after being deliberately closed, windows spring open in winter, files and pencils vanish from office drawers. At some point, haunting becomes less of a supernatural event and more of an extremely irritating coworker. One apparition is known as the lamplighter. He's described as a man with dark hair and white puffy shirt drifting through the soldiers' barracks with a long pole and a dim candle, lighting lamps that have not needed him for 200 years. Another is Elizabeth Pratt, better known as the Screaming Lady. According to legend, Elizabeth lived in the officers' quarters and had a terrible falling out with her daughter. Before they could reconcile, the daughter became ill and died. Overcome with grief, Elizabeth took her own life. Her sorrow, it seems, remained. Screams have reportedly echoed from the officers' quarters so loudly that neighbors have called the police. Some children have claimed to see a woman looking from the window, one hand pressed to her forehead, as if though still searching for the daughter she lost. And then there is the faceless man. During the Civil War, Private William H. Howe was imprisoned at Fort Mifflin on charges of desertion and the murder of the officer sent to arrest him. Howe admitted to desertion but denied the murder. He was nevertheless hanged at the fort, reportedly the only prisoner ever executed there. A black hood covered his head when he died. Legend says the grass still refuses to grow where the gallows stood. It is also said that Howe still drifts through the casemates, a dark figure whose face cannot be seen. Maybe these stories are echoes. Maybe they are folklore grown in the cracks between history and imagination. Or maybe Fort Mifflin is simply one of those places where the past was too loud to fade quietly. After all, when a fort has burned, been bombarded, rebuilt, imprisoned men, stored munitions, watched wars come and go, and still stands beside the river after nearly 2 centuries of military service, perhaps silence is too much to ask. At Fort Mifflin, the flag kept flying. And according to the stories, so did the dead.
I definitely want to go.
Yeah, definitely need to check that one out.
Yep.
Next, we're going to go along to another place where not, when we have stories about, the ghosts of the American Revolution, not every battlefield really looks like a battlefield, per se.
Yep.
Some are inns with dining rooms, polished floors, comfortable beds, and guests who arrive with luggage instead of muskets. But in 1775, Concord, Massachusetts was not a quiet tourist town. It was one of the places where the Revolution began. Concord's Colonial Inn stands today at 48 Monument Square, about half a mile from the North Bridge, where the famous "Shot Heard Round the World" rang out on April 19, 1775. The oldest section of the building dates to 1716, built by Captain James Minot. Before and during the Revolution, parts of the property were used to store supplies, including weapons, powder, and shot. That made Concord a target. When British troops marched out from Boston to seize colonial military stores, local militia rose to meet them. The fighting at Lexington and Concord marked the opening clash of the Revolutionary War, and as the smoke cleared, the wounded had to be taken somewhere. Many were brought to the Minot property. Today, the inn is charming. In 1775, part of it became a field hospital. Dr. Timothy Minot, Jr. used what is now the Liberty Room as a triage area. Room 24, now one of the inn's most requested guest rooms, served as his operating room. Nearby room 27 became the morgue. Medicine in the 18th century was brutal by modern standards. There was no anesthesia as we understand it. Infection was poorly understood. Surgical tools were often crude. Battlefield wounds from large caliber musket balls could shatter bone and tear flesh so badly that amputation became the expected solution. Even if a soldier survived the battle, he still had to survive the doctor. For many, the hospital was not a place of recovery. It was the final stop. That history clings especially tightly to room 24. The first well-known ghost report from the room came in June of 1966, when honeymooners MP and Judith Valens of Highland Falls, New York, stayed there. Afterward, Judith wrote to the innkeeper, Loring Grimes, describing what she had seen in the middle of the night. She woke with the overwhelming feeling that someone else was in the room. When she opened her eyes, she saw a grayish figure beside the bed, about 4 feet away. It was not clear enough to be called a person, but it had the shape of one. The figure stood still, then drifted toward the foot of the bed near the fireplace before melting away. Judith said she was so frightened she could not even scream. Grimes replied with a little humor, suggesting the presence may have been Dr. Minot making his rounds. Since then, room 24 has built a reputation all its own. Guests have reported lights flickering, turning on, off and on, or blazing to life in the middle of the night. One guest awoke to find every light in the room on, along with the television. Others have heard whispers from the closet, watched the door slam by itself, or felt unseen hands gently tucking them into bed. That last one is either a little comforting or absolutely horrifying, depending on how much you enjoy surprise paranormal housekeeping.
I mean, it's not the first time we've heard of that.
No, it's not. It's not, but yeah.
It's still disturbing.
It can be. It's a thing. It's a thing. Anyways, some guests claim to have seen wounded soldiers appear briefly before vanishing. Others speak of a middle-aged woman, sometimes identified in local lore as a nurse named Rosemary, moving through room 24 and the nearby halls like a mist. But the stories are not limited to that one room. A woman has reportedly been seen writing at a guest room desk. A little girl has been spotted running near room 24. A young girl in a bonnet has appeared near the front desk. In the sitting room, guests have described an older woman and a tall, slender gentleman in a top hat, sometimes speculated to be connected to the Thoreau family. There is even said to be a redcoat soldier who appears at the bar, which feels either tragic or impressively committed to finishing the campaign. Employees and guests have also reported objects falling from shelves, items vanishing for weeks before turning up in strange places, and voices speaking directly behind them, only for no one to be there when they turn around. Skeptics might say that this is what happens when an old building creaks, settles, and collects stories for 3 centuries. But the Colonial Inn is not just old. It stands near the place where a war began, inside walls that stored weapons, received the wounded, witnessed crude surgery, and held the dead. Room 24 was not always a guest room. The Liberty Room was not always a place for dinner. Room 27 was not always just a number on a door. Some hotels promise history. Concord's Colonial Inn may offer something a little bit more intimate. There, history may still whisper from the closet, sit quietly at the bar, or stand beside the bed in the dark, waiting for someone to wake up and remember.
So when do we leave?
Let's look at our calendar.
Road trip. All right, we're gonna pop over to New Jersey if there aren't any questions.
Patrick hopes you feel better soon. I don't know what that was, but
that was a drainage.
Yeah. But yes, Fort Mifflin sounds like a nice little road trip. Totally agree. And Beverly, hi Beverly.
Hello.
Hope you had a safe and happy 4th of July as well. And then, Patrick shared some information on the Colonial Inn.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
All right, so now we're going to go to the Old Tenant Presbyterian Church in Manalapan, New Jersey. On June 28th of 1778, the Battle of Mammoth raged through a day so brutally hot that soldiers seemed nearly as threatened by thirst as they did by the British fire. Among them was Captain Henry Fauntleroy of the 5th Virginia Line. According to a later account by George Washington's adopted son, George Washington Parke Curtis, Fauntleroy rode to the nearby Perrin Farm in search of water. At the well, exhausted Continental soldiers crowded forward, desperate to drink. Fauntleroy, still mounted, reportedly waved them out ahead of him. A cannonball came bounding down the lane, and, it struck the 22-year-old officer near the hip with a horrific force, tearing through his body and hurling him from his horse. Fauntleroy was killed instantly. His friends carried what remained of him to the Old Tenant Church, where it was being used as a battlefield hospital. There they laid him in a pew at the back of the sanctuary. Tradition holds that bloodstains from that terrible day can still be seen on the wood. And perhaps Fauntleroy himself still lingers there. Visitors have reported an iridescent figure appearing in the church window at night, gazing out toward the place where he died. Maybe he's still watching the old battlefield. Maybe he's searching for what the cannonball took for him. Or maybe, after all this time, he's still waiting for his turn at the well. That's a long time to need a drink.
It is.
Just saying.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. Now, cemeteries are the grand old stage of the supernatural. They're where fog rolls low over the stones, where gnarled trees lean in, and where B-movie ghouls reach a stiff hand up through the dirt. You know what we're talking about. But not all cemeteries are haunted because the dead are lonely. Some may be haunted because the dead are angry. In Boston's historic North End sits Copp's Hill Burying Ground, the city's second oldest cemetery. It dates to 1659 and was named for William Copp, a local cobbler.
The burying ground sits at an elevation once higher than it is today. Over time, the hill is cut down by several feet. The earth used to help fill nearby Mill Pond. But during the Revolution, Copp's Hill was still commanded an important view. From there, British forces could look out across the river toward the rebel positions. After the British found themselves trapped in Boston, tempers weren't exactly gentle. The Patriot forces had hemmed them in on the peninsula, cutting off foraging parties and making it harder for the army to secure food and supplies. After a particularly frustrating affair on Noodles Island, on Hog Island, where British livestock were killed or driven off, General Thomas Gage decided to fortify Boston's North End. You all remember Gage. He had a bit of a temper on him.
It was a thing.
It was a thing.
So the British hauled heavy cannon up Copp's Hill and built a battery among the graves. That alone would have been enough to sour the mood of any self-respecting ghost. But according to local tradition, the soldiers did more than disturb the dead. They used the headstones for target practice. One imagines bored troops, perhaps fortified by rum, aiming their muskets at colonial grave markers and blasting chips from the stone while shouting across the water at the rebels they could not quite reach. It was a petty insult, but an enduring one. Some of those stones still bear the scars. One grave in particular seemed to have drawn British attention, that of Captain Daniel Malcolm. Malcolm was a patriot, a smuggler, and a first-class irritant to British authorities. He was the sort of man who could allegedly rally hundreds of men and boys to prevent officials from seizing his contraband wine. When illness overtook him in 1769, Malcolm reportedly asked to be buried 10 feet deep so he would be safe from British bullets. The British, apparently, took that personally. His headstone was struck repeatedly, as if the soldiers were determined to prove that not even death could place Malcolm beyond their reach. Today, Copp's Hill is not just remembered as a revolutionary landmark. It is also said to be one of Boston's more restless burial grounds. Visitors have reported strange lights, muffled cries, painful groans, and shadowy figures moving among the old stones. Some claim the damaged grave markers still carry the anger of the people buried beneath them, their memory insulted by men who turned a cemetery into a firing range. Of course, skeptics may say stories are only stories. Old stones crack, shadows move. Boston has enough history packed into its narrow streets to make any nighttime walk feel haunted. But if ever a cemetery had reason to hold a grudge, Copp's Hill makes a strong case. After all, it is one thing to be buried in peace. It is another to spend eternity under a headstone that has been shot full of holes by the enemy. And if the dead of Copp's Hill still mutter in the dark, still drift between the stones, and still stare toward the harbor after all of these years, who can blame them? 250 years may sound like a long time, but when you have all of eternity to be offended, revenge can afford to take its time.
And I will say, Daniel's headstone looks like Swiss cheese. It's got golf ball size divots in it. Yeah.
They did a number on it.
They did a number on it. All right, we're going to stay back to New Jersey in Morristown. And this is an area known as Jockey's Hollow. Now, when most people think the Continental Army is suffering through winter, first thing that comes to mind is Valley Forge. That's the one we all learn about in school. But it's not the only place that the Army suffered. So you get the great image of the soldiers in the American Revolution, George Washington's men hungry, barefoot, huddling in rough huts, clinging to the cause that the future of a nation hung on by a thread. Valley Forge, it's miserable. Nobody is taking away from that. But it's not the worst winter the Continental Army actually endured. That dubious honor belongs to Morristown, New Jersey, and the winter encampment at Jockey Hollow. In December of 1779, Washington's army settled in what would become the most brutal winter of the North American history. Valley Forge may have become the more famous symbol, but Jockey Hollow made Valley Forge look gentle by comparison. The cold was freakish. Saltwater harbors and inlets along the northeast coast froze solid. The Hudson River became a sheet of ice so thick that people crossed it with horses and wagons between now what is Jersey City and New York City. Ice on the Passaic and Rotterton rivers reached nearly 6 feet thick. One soldier wrote that his ink actually froze in his pen. During that January, the temperature rose above freezing only once. Then, from January 2nd to January 4th of 1780, Washington's 10,000 troops were battered by a vicious blizzard. Even though the 2 feet of snow were already on the ground, across that winter there was more than 24 snowstorms. Drifts climbed as high as 15 feet.
Burr.
Yeah. Igloos, anybody?
That's the last, no.
That's a lot of snow.
You could build igloos.
Igloos would probably have been their best bet.
Probably.
They may not have known how to do that, though.
Somehow I doubt that they actually thought of that.
No. Anyway, the soldiers were expected to survive this while they were already destitute. Dr. James Thatcher, a Massachusetts surgeon serving with the Army, wrote that the men lacked both tents, blankets, and that some were barefoot and nearly naked. Washington himself said the Army was perishing for want. The men had to build their own huts in the middle of this frozen misery. Food was scarce, money was scarce, supplies were scarce. Some accounts claim that the soldiers roasted and ate their own shoes. Others ate whatever horse feed remained. Birch bark became food. Major General Johanna de Kalb was also who had seen earlier winter encampments. There we go. Wrote that those who had only suffered through Valley Forge or Meadowbrook did not truly know what it meant to suffer until they endured Morristown. Soon the encampment became deadly. Soldiers died from starvation, exposure. Disease remained a constant threat, including smallpox, in which Washington tried to control through inoculation. Private Joseph Plum Martin later wrote that if this did not count as suffering, he did not know what did. Desertions rose, talk of mutiny grew, even spring seemed to mock them. 10 inches of snow fell on April Fool's Day. The snow continued into May, and by the end of that month, Washington was prepared to hang at least 8 soldiers for insubordination. He reprieved 7, but 1 did go through as an execution to proceed as a warning to the others. It may have been one of the most difficult moments of Washington's command, and he did not have to write a single redcoat to reach it. Today, Jockey Hollow is part of Morristown National Historical Park. It's the first national historical park in the United States. It is a wooded, hilly, and quiet space with trails winding through the land that still feel close to its 18th century self. Replica soldier huts stand there, now reminders of the men who endured the winter that tried to erase them. And perhaps some of them still remains there.
Mm-hmm. Over the years, visitors and hikers have reported strange visions in the woods. One reoccurring story describes colonial soldiers marching in formation through the trees, appearing briefly before vanishing into the landscape. Reenactors have their own stories. During one overnight stay in the replica huts, a reenactor walked down the hill to a portable restroom. On her way back, she suddenly heard fife and drum music playing close beside her. It was not distant. It was not faint. It was right there. Then, just as quickly as it began, it stopped. There were no other people nearby. None of the reenactors had instruments. The woods went quiet again. Others have reported shadowy figures moving near the huts, outlines of people darting where no living person should be. Some reenactors believe the spirits are more likely to reveal themselves to those who come with respect for the soldiers and what they endured. At the base of the hill is a soldier's burial ground, where more than 100 men are believed to rest. There are no individual stones, only a plaque mounted on a small boulder. Cemeteries are not always frightening, but an unmarked burial place for men who froze, starved, sickened, and died far from home carries its own weight. There may have been a hospital nearby as well. In the 1930s, archaeological work uncovered a bullet extractor and a bitten bullet, the sort of grim object associated with pain before the days of anesthesia. Sugarloaf Hill, where much of this history gathers, has earned a more ominous nickname over the years: Haunted Hill. One of its best-known apparitions is a translucent woman in a long white colonial-style dress carrying a lantern along the trails. She is said to appear most often during the quieter winter months when the park is cold, still, and perhaps closer in spirit to the winter of 1779. There are stranger stories, too. A longtime resident living near the edge of the park has described a brown dog appearing inside his home, chasing his cats before vanishing. He does not own a dog. Given the desperate story of soldiers eating a pet dog during the winter encampment, it is an unsettling detail, even if it only remains local lore. Then there is the story of a man named Keith, who visited Jockey Hollow with his dog. They barely started down the trail when the dog stopped, growling and barking at a fixed point ahead. Keith saw nothing. No person, no animal, Nothing moving in the trees, but the dog's hair stood up along her back. Her paws seemed frozen to the ground. She refused to go further. When Keith turned back, her ears stayed pinned tight against her head, the posture of an animal deeply unsettled by something its owner could not see. Maybe it was nothing, a sound too faint for human ears, a scent on the wind, a deer hidden in the brush. Or maybe, in a place where so many men suffered through America's worst winter, the woods still remember. At Jockey Hollow, the revolution did not need cannon fire to become a nightmare. The cold was enough. Hunger was enough. Disease was enough. And if figures still move between those trees, if music still rises from nowhere, if a woman with a lantern walks the winter trails, perhaps they are not trying to frighten us. Perhaps they are trying to make sure that Valley Forge is not the only suffering we remember. Rough.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have made it.
Mm-mm.
Nope. I would not have made it. Nope.
No.
Nope. Oh.
Not at all.
No. I cannot wrap my head around it.
We've grown soft in 250 years.
That's an understatement. Anyways, Patrick was very excited about the ghost dog. We love ghost dogs. We love ghost cats.
Yep.
Yes. You can go pet the ghost. We'll if we find a ghost dog, we'll pet it.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, we're going to stick to New Jersey and go over to the northeast corner near the New York state line. Ringwood was once the center of an iron manufacturing and home to some of the colony's most important iron masters. Today, Ringwood Manor sits within Ringwood State Park, surrounded by the woods and the old roads. Though the present manor grew in the years and decades after the Revolution, it carries a lingering sense of industry, war, and folklore that shaped the site over the centuries. Skeptics connected to the estate have brushed off the ghost stories to overactive imaginations, but then again, not everyone has volunteered to spend the night there. Ringwood's most important revolutionary figure was Colonel Robert Erskine, a Scottish engineer, inventor, and ironmaster. Erskine came to America in 1771 to manage Ringwood's iron operations. During the war, Ringwood became a crucial supplier of the American Army. In 1777, Washington appointed Erskine as the geographer and surveyors general of the Continental Army, and Ringwood's ironworks helped support the Army's broader Hudson River defenses. Erskine produced hundreds of maps before falling ill during a surveying expedition. He died of pneumonia in 1780, only at the age of 45 years old. His tomb still stands in the old Ringwood Cemetery near the manor. Ahaha. Hello, sir. Now, according to legend, he's also there. Erskine's ghost has been seen sitting on his own tomb. He is said to appear at night carrying a pale blue lantern, guiding travelers towards an old wooden bridge at Drink Brook. Once they reach it, he vanishes. Another spirit is said to arrive in the more dramatic fashion, though, to be a servant named Jackson White, he bursts through the front door, slams it behind him, races down the hall, charges up the stairs, and disappears at the second-floor landing. He's a very active and dramatic ghost.
Quite.
Then there's the Mad Mag. An old mining road called Margaret King Avenue sits at a large roadside boulder known as Spook Rock. From fissures in the stone, Mad Mag is said to emerge wailing and moaning before vanishing back into the rock. For years, locals avoided that stretch after dark. At Ringwood, the iron seems to remember.
Sounds like another interesting place. All these are interesting places.
Yes.
Definitely road trip.
Yes.
All right. Ooh.
I'm sorry, you got this one.
Yeah, I thought they... Talk about misery. All right. In we go. Yeah. All right. Thinking of American Revolutionary battlefields brings forth images again of cannon smoke and musket fire, drums, flags, all of that. It is a war remembered mostly on land, in places like Lexington, Concord, Saratoga, Valley Forge. But some of the Revolution's darkest chapters unfolded on the water. Sea power mattered enormously during the war. Whoever controlled the rivers, harbors, and coastlines controlled supplies, movement, and pressure. And in occupied New York, the British found a use for old ships that had nothing to do with glorious naval combat. They turned them into floating prisons. Among those prison ships, none became more infamous than the HMS Jersey. The Jersey was built in 1736, a 144-foot, 60-gun British warship launched in a time of peace, but soon pulled into conflict. She saw action during the War of Jenkins' Ear and later served in other engagements before being converted into a hospital ship in 1771. That alone gives her a strange arc. A warship turned hospital, a place once meant for battle transformed into a place meant for healing. But the Revolution gave the Jersey one final role, and it was the worst of all. In 1776, British General William Howe arrived in New York with a massive force. Negotiations with the Americans failed, and in August he invaded Long Island. Soon, New York became the center of British occupation, a role it would hold until the end of the war. As the British captured more and more prisoners, they faced a problem. Where do you put them all? Some soldiers taken in battle, others were sailors. Some were civilians imprisoned for refusing to swear allegiance to the crown. Land-based jails filled quickly, so the British turned to old ships anchored in the water near New York. By the winter of 1779, the HMS Jersey was anchored in Wallabout Bay, in what is now the Brooklyn Navy Yard. By then, she was no longer a proud ship of the line. She was a rotting hulk, rusted, battered, and stripped of glory. Her appearance was almost a warning. The crew aboard the Jersey was small compared to the suffering it oversaw. A captain, mates, sailors, Marines, soldiers, and support staff. But together they governed what survivors would remember as a floating receptacle of misery. The conditions were horrific. Prisoners were crammed into the dark lower decks, where the air grew foul and hot. In summer, the trapped men baked. They drank brackish water. They starved. They fought vermin, lice, disease, dehydration, and despair. Contagion spread easily. Madness was never far away. More American prisoners died aboard British prison ships in New York Harbor than were killed in battle during the Revolution. Estimates vary, but thousands perished on those hulks, with the HMS Jersey remembered as the worst of them. One former prisoner, Alexander Coffin Jr., was only 18 years old when he was held aboard the Jersey. He later wrote that every spark of humanity seemed to have left the British officers in charge of the ship, and that only abuse and insult could be expected there. Every morning, death had to be dealt with. On the Jersey, an average of several bodies were reportedly removed each day. Emaciated remains were lowered over the side into boats and rowed to shore. There, along the Brooklyn shoreline, they were heaped into shallow mass graves and covered with only little sand. But the dead did not stay hidden. Tides washed the sand away. Bones emerged. Rotting remains lay exposed along the shore, a horrifying reminder of the men who had vanished into the prison ships. For years after the war, human bones continued washing up along Wallabout Bay. The Jersey itself did not survive long after the Revolution. When the war ended in 1783 and the last survivors were removed, the ship was burned and left to disappear into the mud and water of the place where so many men had died. But for those who survived her, the Jersey never really vanished. Many carried the memory for the rest of their lives, and in Brooklyn, the dead continued to surface. For years, local residents gathered exposed remains from the shoreline so they could be buried with some measure of dignity. Eventually, many of those remains were placed in a crypt in Brooklyn's Fort Greene Park. In 1908, the prison ship Martyrs Monument was dedicated there, honoring the thousands of Americans who died aboard British prison ships during the Revolution. Still, the story did not end neatly. In October of 1902, laborers at the Brooklyn Navy Yard reportedly uncovered the sunken remains of the Jersey while extending a dock. When the hull was pierced, some said a foul smell arose from the mud, as if the ship had been holding its breath for more than a century. After that, stories began to gather around the waterfront. People spoke of faint whispers near the water, strange sensations along the docks, the feeling that something sorrowful lingered where the prison ships once sat. Perhaps it was only the mind filling in the silence, or perhaps Wallabout Bay had absorbed too much suffering to ever be entirely quiet again. The Brooklyn Navy Yard itself would go on to have a long history after the Revolution. Established in 1801, it became one of America's great naval centers. During World War II, more than 70,000 people worked there, building and repairing warships. With that much industry, danger, and death layered onto older ground, it is no surprise that ghost stories followed. Local lore speaks of a spectral sailor haunting the docks and buildings, still appearing in naval attire. There are tales of a lady in white wandering near the old dry docks, gazing out toward the water. Building 92, once connected to the Navy Yard's industrial past, has also drawn stories of unease, footsteps, strange noises, and ghostly figures. But the Revolution's ghost here is older than those stories. It belongs to the prison ships, and it belongs to the Jersey. Today, the Brooklyn waterfront is busy, modern, and loud. The Navy Yard has been reborn as an industrial and creative complex. People pass through for work, tours, business, and events, often with little sense of what once floated nearby. But beneath the noise of the city, the older story remains. A rotting ship, a dark hold, men packed together in heat and sickness, bodies lowered into boats before dawn, bones washing onto the shore long after the war was over. So if you find yourself near the old waters of Wallabout Bay and the wind carries something that sounds almost like a whisper, it may be the voices of men who fought for liberty, died imprisoned, and never truly left the harbor.
I have to laugh because we have a ship passing right now. I just saw it over there.
Okay, well, it's out there.
Yeah, it's out there.
Yeah.
Just timing.
Ships. All right.
Popping over to Connecticut.
So, there are a few famous names that do tend to drift through the candlelight when we're talking about the American Revolution.
I mean, George Washington travels to all the old haunts.
Yep. Nathan Hale is said to linger near the schoolhouse where he once taught.
But in New London, Connecticut, the ghosts there are not quite attached to a quiet room or a fond memory. They're attached to a massacre.
Uh-oh, you broke it.
I did not break it. I shrunk it.
Fort Griswold stands across the Thames River from New London, overlooking a town that in September of 1781 became the target of America's most infamous traitor, Benedict Arnold. By then, Arnold had traded his continental uniform for British scarlet. General George Washington was marching south towards Virginia, closing in on Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown. British Commander Sir Henry Clinton hoped a raid into New England might pull Washington's attention back north. Arnold, eager to prove his worth to the British and perhaps settle old scores against his home state of Connecticut, accepted command of the expedition. His target was New London, a town the British considered a nuisance because of its privateers. On September 6th of 1781, Arnold landed his force. He divided roughly 1,600 men into two columns. Arnold himself entered New London, where his troops began setting fire to the town. The other force crossed into the Groton side of the river and moved against Fort Griswold. Inside the fort, Colonel William Ledyard commanded about 160 militia. The British assault was fierce. Again and again, the attackers came on. Again and again, the defenders threw them back. Lieutenant Colonel Edmund Eyre, leading the British attack, was seriously wounded. Major William Montgomery, second in command, was killed as he mounted the parapet. But numbers mattered. The British finally overran the defenses. With further resistance hopeless, Colonel Ledyard ordered his men to lay down their arms. At that point, American losses had been relatively light compared to what came next. Ledyard surrendered his sword. American tradition holds that that sword was accepted and then used against him. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughter, with senior officers with their senior officers dead or wounded. Oh, now I completely lost it. Okay. With their senior officers dead or wounded and rage boiling over after the brutal fight, British troops fell upon the surrendered Americans. By the time the killing stopped, more than 80 defenders were dead and many more wounded, some mortally. Across the river, New London burned. The raid brought Arnold the attention he wanted, but not the glory. Even among the British, the brutality of Fort Griswold was difficult to defend. Arnold's reputation, already stained by treason, sank further. He would never again receive a truly significant command.
He was not gentlemanly.
As for the men who died inside the fort, some say they never left. Today, Fort Griswold is preserved as a historic site, its earthworks and stone walls still standing above the Thames. Visitors can walk the grounds, look toward New London, and imagine the smoke, the shouting, the crashing assault, and then the awful stillness after surrender turned into murder. Over the years, picnickers and visitors have reported strange apparitions on the grounds. Wounded soldiers are said to appear suddenly, sometimes seated nearby as though resting from a battle that ended more than 2 centuries ago. They do not always seem threatening, but they are unsettling. And why wouldn't they be? Fort Griswold is not haunted by mystery alone. It is haunted by betrayal, rage, and the terrible knowledge that many of its defenders died after they had already put down their weapons. Some battlefields are restless because men died fighting. Fort Griswold may be restless because men died after the fighting should have stopped.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to head down to the south now, to South Carolina and Georgetown. If the American Revolution has had an answer to the headless horseman of Sleepy Hollow, he may be found along the old roads and plantations near Georgetown, South Carolina. This story has all the required ingredients: a doomed sentry, a flash of steel, and a ghost who seems very determined to recover one particular missing piece of himself. By 1780, the American Revolution had shifted south. The war in the North had become a stalemate, and after the fall of Charleston, British forces under General Charles Cornwallis pushed through to the Carolinas. Patriot resistance did not vanish, though it scattered, regrouped, and turned meaner. A few men embroiled that kind of resistance better than General Francis Marion. Known as the Swamp Fox, Marion was famous for striking suddenly and vanishing into the wetlands, leaving the British furious, confused, chasing shadows. His tactics were unconventional. One of his most valuable weapons was information. That is where Agnes Ragg comes into the story. Anne Ragg comes into the story. Anne was the daughter of Samuel Ragg, a wealthy loyalist plantation owner near Georgetown. Her father supported the crown, but Anne's sympathies leaned towards the Patriot cause. According to local tradition, when some of Marion's men were captured and held at an outbuilding on the family plantation, Anne secretly sent word to Marion. Most of the British soldiers, she reported, were away at a party at nearby Mansfield Plantation. The prisoners were being guarded by only one dragoon sentry. Marion did not waste the opportunity. That night, he and his men rode to the plantation, and in the darkness, the sentry heard the hoofbeats approaching and called out, "Who goes there?" The answer came in the form of a rider bursting from the night. With one brutal stroke of a sword, the sentry was beheaded. Marion's men freed the prisoners, and they escaped into the darkness as quickly as they had arrived. The dead sentry was buried in an unmarked grave on the plantation. It should have been the end of him. It was not.
Dude, I'm trying to read.
But dude wants to play with his tail. Anyway, a few nights later, one of the plantation enslaved servants reported seeing a headless man staggering up the drive. He wore a British uniform. His body was soaked in blood that dripped from the place where his head should have been. The witness fled and told the others. No one believed him. Then Anne herself heard the hoofbeats outside. Looking from her window, she saw the headless British soldier dismount from his horse, stumble towards the veranda. Before he could reach it, he vanished. After that, the sights continued. Over the years, people claimed to see the headless sentry either mounted on horseback or staggering along the road and driveways near the plantation. Often, the strange sounds come first. Distant hoofbeats, a clatter of riders, the roar of horses approaching just before nightfall. Then the figure would appear, a gruesome remnant of the Revolution, still dressed in his British dragoon uniform. In later versions of the story, the ghost became even more restless. Around Halloween, he has reportedly been seen not only near the old plantation grounds, but even in Georgetown itself. Sometimes hoofbeats announce him. Other times witnesses say they hear what sounds like chains dragging across the porch. When he appears on foot, he is said to totter with a pistol in hand, his body swaying from side to side as though searching for the head that was lost in the dark. As for why he still lingers, maybe he's still on duty. Maybe he's still trying to challenge the riders who came thundering out of the night. Maybe he's simply doomed to replay the last few seconds of his life, forever trying to demand who goes there.
My dude.
I know.
All right.
You must be the center of attention.
Love a good Headless Horseman story.
Yes.
All right. And
Back north.
back at 16 Durham Avenue in Metuchen, New Jersey, I probably butchered that, apologies, stands the Allen House Tavern, the oldest surviving structure in town. The house is traditionally said to have served travelers during the Revolutionary era. Like many taverns of the era, it was more than a place to drink. It was a meeting ground, a shelter, a place for news, arguments, rumors, ginger cakes, and ale. According to local lore, it was even a place where British and American sympathizers could sit under the same roof and search for common ground, however briefly. But some visitors may have stayed longer than intended. The house is said to be haunted by several spirits, including a Hessian soldier who reportedly hanged himself in an upstairs bedroom. Another frequently told story concerns a young mother wandering the house in search of her kidnapped child, said to have been killed by British soldiers. History does not confirm that this grieving woman was Catherine Allen, but the story has clung tightly to the old tavern. Yet not every ghost at the Allen house seems terrifying. Louise King, a former school teacher who lived there for 50 years, often spoke fondly of a ghost with piercing blue eyes. Perhaps, after enough time, even a haunting can begin to feel like company. And, with that, the American Revolution is often remembered as a story of ideals, courage, and independence. And it was. But it was also a story of hunger, disease, fear, betrayal, and death in places that were never meant to become battlegrounds. Forts burned, inns became hospitals, churches held the wounded, ships became prisons, cemeteries became targets, and in the silence that followed, the stories remained. Maybe the ghosts of the Revolution are only folklore, shaped by generations trying to make sense of suffering that should not be forgotten. Or maybe some moments leave echoes strong enough to outlast the people who lived them. Either way, these hauntings remind us that history is not always neat, distant, or safely buried. Sometimes it still marches through the woods. Sometimes it waits by the water. And sometimes it whispers from the dark. And ladies and gentlemen, that is our last story for this evening.
Yes.
Appreciate y'all tuning in, and I should not have taken my glasses off because I can't see anything here without them. All right. Yeah, seeing the headless British century would be unnerving.
Yes.
Be a little exciting. It'd be something.
Yes,
It would definitely be something. Yeah.
Yeah, so just so everybody knows, we're going to be off this month because
we got a lot going on.
We got a lot going on. And our normal 2 weeks, Chris and I will actually be at Hanover Tavern doing Spirits with the Spirits there. You can get tickets at hanovertavern.org. And then we will be back on the 27th with Iowa. Yes, Haunted Iowa.
End of the month.
End of the month.
Yep. So we got a lot going on these next few weeks. So this little break that we're on right now, much needed.
Yes.
But appreciate y'all tuning in. Hope that you enjoyed the stories. And yeah, hope that maybe you can join us on a tour sometime, or maybe
you can catch us at Spirits with the
Spirit,
Spirits.
the Hanover.
Or at Virago Alley's Warriors in Bloom the first weekend in August. Again, we'll be telling stories there on the stage as well as having our vendor tent.
Yep. So got a lot going on. I feel like there's even more than that. But in any case, yeah. In the meantime, stay cool.
Please.
It's been stupid hot.
Stay dry.
Stay dry because it's been stupid stormy as well. Actually, it's not all that wet because we're still in a drought somehow.
We are.
But
That's because we keep getting these downpours and not a gentle rain like we need.
We get flash floods, but not enough to let it actually like soak in. But anyways, thank you all very much for watching. Hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Stay spooky, y'all.